He was only 4 months old, but for days he refused to move from that drain as if his whole world was trapped beneath it. Snow clung to his white fur in frozen clumps, his tiny body shaking against the bite of the Minneapolis wind. The street was almost empty, the kind of cold that keeps people indoors. Yet there he sat, pressed close to the storm grate, eyes locked on the darkness below, like his life depended on it. I was halfway back to my truck with a bag of groceries when I saw him. My boots crunched over the ice and I slowed, frowning. People passed him without a second glance. A man in a thick parka stopped just long enough to take a photo before walking away. A woman stepped around him, muttering, "Poor thing," but never bending down. No one touched him. No one asked why he was there. I took a step closer, my voice low. "Hey, buddy." His ears twitched, but his gaze never broke from the grate. Then I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. A thin, muffled whimper rising from the shadows beneath the bars. My stomach tightened. I crouched, leaning over the icy metal, but the black gap swallowed the light. The sound came again, sharper now, and Norbert shifted as if to shield it from me. Snowflakes stung my cheeks, the wind howling between houses, but the puppy stayed rooted, tail curled tight under him. I caught the faintest flicker of movement in the dark, pale fur, trembling. Another puppy. My chest tightened with the kind of urgency you can't ignore. Norbert looked up at me, then, his eyes wide and wet, flicking between me and the grate, begging without a sound. The whimper from below broke again, weaker, more desperate. If we didn't get that grate open soon, whatever was down there wouldn't survive the night. I moved slowly, crouching until my knees scraped the frozen concrete. "It's okay, boy. I'm here." My breath clouded between us. But Norbert didn't flinch. His muscles were tight, ready to spring, but not to run away, only to guard. He glanced down at the grate again, and the whimper rose from the darkness, like a thread pulling at my chest. I eased a hand forward, palm open, letting him smell me. His nose twitched, but his eyes never softened. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of losing what was down there. The wind whipped harder, snow biting into my face, and my fingers burned from the cold. Minneapolis winters don't forgive mistakes, and every second felt heavier. "Who's down there, huh?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, then gave a sharp, urgent bark toward the grate like he was answering me. The sound from below, fainter now, came again, a pitiful cry that made the back of my throat ache. I shifted to the side, peering through the bars. But all I saw was darkness. The opening was narrow, the steel slick with ice, the smell of damp concrete rising up in little clouds of frozen breath. The thought hit me hard. If another puppy was trapped down there, the cold and wet would finish the job long before nightfall. Norbert stepped closer to the grate, pawing at it with frantic little scrapes. His nails clicked against the metal, echoing down into the drain. I could almost hear the tiny answer from below, like they were speaking in their own language. I swallowed hard, feeling the urgency rise in my chest. This wasn't something I could walk away from. Not with that look in his eyes. Not with the snow piling higher around us. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, my fingers stiff, and dialed for help. Whatever was down there, it needed saving. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear, calm and distant, like we weren't talking about life or death. "Sir, can you confirm this is an animal in a storm drain?" I pressed my glove tighter to the phone, shielding it from the wind. "It's a puppy, and there's another one trapped down there. They're freezing. We don't have ours. She promised to send a unit, but her tone told me this wasn't their priority." I hung up staring at the great Kathleen and felt that old frustration claw at me. The same one I'd felt as a boy when my German shepherd, Rex, had dragged a half-drowned kitten out of a ditch. Animals protect each other without question. People, we hesitate. Norbert hadn't moved an inch. His breath rose in quick puffs, frosting the fur around his muzzle. Every few seconds he'd lean forward, pressing his nose against the ice-cold steel, then glanced toward me like he was making sure I wasn't leaving. The sound from below had faded to a faint, rhythmic whine, weak but still there. I looked up and down the street. The sun was blinding against the snow, but the sidewalks were nearly empty. A man across the road slowed to watch, then kept walking. My hands clenched inside my gloves. How many days had this puppy been sitting here? How many people had walked past him, heard that cry, and done nothing? The minutes felt longer in the cold. I shifted my weight, stamping my boots to keep the blood moving, and kept my eyes on Norbert. He didn't care about the temperature. He didn't care about himself. Every muscle, every breath was anchored to the life below. Somewhere far down the street, I saw the slow flash of hazard lights. The police were coming, but I knew just from the look on Norbert's face that they weren't coming fast enough. They didn't sound like they were in a hurry. The cruiser rolled to a stop a few feet from us, tires crunching over the ice. Two officers stepped out, bundled in thick jackets, their breath hanging in the air. One of them glanced at Norbert, then at me, his brows pulling together. "You're the caller." "That's him," I said, nodding toward the white German shepherd puppy. "He's been here for days. There's another one trapped down there, still alive." They approached the great boots squealing on the frozen pavement. One officer crouched and peered inside, his flashlight beam bouncing off wet concrete. "Can't see much, just shadows." He reached out and tapped the bars with his gloved hand, and Norbert immediately stepped between them, planting himself like a wall. The other officer gave a short laugh. "Protective little guy," but his tone shifted when the faint whimper floated up from below. "Okay, there's something down there." They knelt beside the grate, pulling at the edges, but the steel didn't budge. Ice had locked it tight to the frame, years of rust holding it like cement. One officer straightened, shaking his head. "It's just a dog, sir. We can't shut down the street for this." The words hit me like a slap. My jaw tightened. It's not just a dog. He's been sitting here in the cold for days, protecting someone who can't protect themselves. The wind whipped through the street, carrying that desperate little cry again. Higher now, like the pup below knew help was close. Norbert pressed his body against the grate, paws scraping at the metal, tail trembling. One officer sighed, rubbing his gloved hands together. "We'll need tools to get this open." I stepped closer, voice low but sharp. "Then get them, because if we wait much longer—" I glanced at Norbert, then back to the dark slit in the street. The whimper from below broke into a weak, shuddering cry that froze all of us in place. One of the officers jogged back to the cruiser to call in for equipment, leaving me with the other, who knelt again, gripping the frozen bars. Norbert paced in a tight circle, whining low in his throat, then returned to paw at the grate like sheer willpower could rip it open. The officer tried again, bracing his boots against the pavement, but the metal didn't move, not even a fraction. "It's welded by ice," he muttered. "We're going to need a crowbar." I scanned the street, desperate. Across the road, a group of 3 teenagers had stopped, their breath puffing in the cold. One held up a phone, filming. "Hey," I called out, "any of you have something, anything, to pry this up?" They shrugged, one of them laughing under his scarf. None of them moved closer. My chest burned, not from the cold, but from the sting of how easy it was for people to watch without helping. Norbert didn't care who was watching. He lowered his head, nose pressed to the ice, and let out a sound so raw it cut right through me. I crouched beside him, rubbing his neck. "Hang on, buddy. We're not leaving him down there." The officer from the cruiser returned, a heavy crowbar in hand. He wedged it under the lip of the grate, the metal screaming against the frozen seal. Inch by inch it shifted, flakes of rust and ice breaking free. Norbert's tail twitched wildly, his body tense with anticipation. And then, just enough space opened for light to spill into the darkness. My heart thudded as I leaned over. In the shadows, curled into a trembling ball, was a small husky puppy, white and gray fur matted with ice. His eyes blinked against the sudden light, but he didn't move. Snowy. He had to be snowy. The whimper that rose from him then wasn't just fear. It was relief. And Norbert, standing above, answered with a sharp, urgent bark that seemed to say, "I told you he was here." The officer dropped to his knees, sliding his gloved hands carefully through the narrow opening. "Easy, little guy. I've got you," he murmured. Snowy didn't fight. He was too cold, too weak. His tiny chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his fur clinging to the officer's gloves as he lifted him free from the shadows. The moment Snowy cleared the grate, Norbert lunged forward, not to run, but to smother him in frantic licks. He pressed his nose into the husky puppy's fur, circling him, whining like a worried parent, counting each breath. Snowy shivered violently, his paws stiff, but the way his eyes flickered at Norbert's touch told me everything. This was why Norbert hadn't left. This was the life he'd been guarding. The officer stood, holding Snowy for a moment, before wrapping him in a thin blanket from the cruiser. "Another night out here," he said quietly, "and he wouldn't have made it." I reached out, letting Snowy rest in my arms. He was lighter than I expected, like holding a bundle of sticks under that fur. His nose was icy, but when Norbert leaned in close, Snowy's eyelids fluttered as if he'd finally found safe ground. For the first time, Norbert's tail gave a small, shaky wag. Shaky wag. Just once. But it was there. Hope. The wind still bit at our faces, but the air felt different now. Less like a warning, more like a push to move fast. We had 2 lives to get warm. The officers exchanged a glance, one of them nodding toward the cruiser. "Let's get them to the shelter. They can treat hypothermia better there." Norbert trotted after us as we walked, never more than an inch from Snowy's side. Every few steps, he'd glance up at me, his eyes saying what words couldn't. "Don't let him out of your sight." We bundled them into the back of the shelter van, the heater blasting warm air that smelled faintly of coffee and wool blankets. The driver, a young woman in a thick red parka, glanced at the 2 puppies and shook her head. "They're lucky someone called when they did." Snowy was wrapped tight in a fleece blanket, his body still trembling in short bursts. Norbert climbed in beside him without hesitation, curling his own body around the smaller pup like a living shield. He didn't close his eyes, not once, just kept watching Snowy's face as if willing him to stay awake. I sat across from them, holding the edge of Snowy's blanket to keep it tucked around him. My gloves were damp from melting snow, but I didn't care. In the hum of the engine, I could hear Snowy's breathing, uneven but steady. Every now and then, Norbert would press his nose to Snowy's ear, as if counting the seconds between breaths. When we reached the shelter, the warmth inside hit us like a wave. Aveta hurried over, scooping Snowy into her arms, her tone brisk but gentle. "We'll get him on fluids and warmed up right away." Norbert tried to follow, but another staff member stepped in front of him. His paws skidded against the tile, a low whine rumbling in his throat. I crouched down, placing a hand on his chest. "Easy, boy." They're helping him. The shelter smelled of hay and disinfectant, the air filled with the faint sounds of other animals. A bark here, a rustle there. Norbert's ears swiveled, but his focus kept snapping back toward the hallway Snowy had disappeared into. A staff member approached with a clipboard. "We'll need your information for the report, and you can visit tomorrow once the little one's stable." I nodded, signing the forms with a stiff hand. As I turned back, I caught Norbert sitting in the middle of the lobby, his head turned toward the hallway, refusing to look anywhere else. In that moment, I knew I'd be back here tomorrow because there was no way I was letting him wait alone. The next morning, the snow was still coming down in slow, heavy flakes when I pulled my coat on. Kitty was at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You're going back for them," she said softly, not as a question, but as a fact. I nodded, grabbing my gloves. Snowy made it through the night. I can't leave Norbert there wondering. She set her mug down and stood, pulling on her own coat. "Then I'm coming too." Kitty had always had that quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be certain. When we walked into the shelter, Norbert was already at the front of his kennel, ears forward the second he saw me. His white fur was clean now, brushed out so it shimmered under the overhead lights. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They were still scanning for Snowy. Kitty crouched beside the kennel, smiling softly. "Hi, sweetheart." Norbert sniffed her hand through the bars, then glanced back toward the hall, tail giving one tentative wag. It was the first time I'd seen him acknowledge anyone besides me since the rescue. The vet led us down the hall to Snowy's recovery room. The husky puppy was lying on a warm pad, hooked to fluids, a soft blanket tucked up to his chin. His eyes lit up when he saw us. Really lit up, and Norbert pressed against the doorframe, straining it closer. "Careful," the tech said, opening the gate. Norbert patted in slowly, then lowered his head to nudge Snowy's cheek. Snowy's tail tapped weakly against the blanket. The room felt warmer than the heat lamps could account for. Kitty's hand found mine. "They belong together," she whispered. I looked down at the two of them, one guarding, one recovering, and felt something settle in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the decision started to take root. Later that afternoon, as we were getting ready to leave, the shelter director called us into her office. Papers were stacked high on her desk, and a bulletin board behind her was filled with photos of adopted pets. She smiled politely, but got straight to the point. "Both puppies have adoption interest. Multiple families have applied for them." I felt a sudden weight in my chest. "Together?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "No, separate homes. We usually can't guarantee bonded animals go as a pair, especially when they're not siblings." I glanced at Kitty, her lips pressed into a thin line, the way they did when she was holding back what she really wanted to say. "They survived because of each other," she told the director, "splitting them up now." She didn't finish the sentence. In the kennels, Norbert was pacing, his ears flicking toward any sound from Snowy's direction. Snowy, still recovering, would lift his head every time Norbert barked, his eyes scanning until they locked on his friend. I leaned on the kennel door, speaking low so only Kitty could hear. "After everything, how could we let them be torn apart?" My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. "They've been through enough." Kitty squeezed my arm. "Then we don't let it happen." We walked back to the office, the sound of Norbert's paws echoing faintly behind us. I looked the director straight in the eye. "What would it take for us to take them both?" She hesitated, glancing at the file in her hands. "Well, there are already applications ahead of yours. I can't promise anything, but I'd made up my mind. Even if I had to fight through a wall of red tape, I wasn't leaving here without both of them." The next morning, Kitty and I were back at the shelter before it even opened. The air was sharp with cold, our breath curling into the early light. We stood outside the glass doors watching the staff move inside, my stomach tight like I was waiting for a verdict in a courtroom. When the director finally let us in, she motioned toward a bench in the lobby. "Give me a few minutes," she said, her expression unravel. Norbert spotted us from his kennel and let out a sharp bark, pawing at the gate. Down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Snowy lifting his head from his blanket. My hands clenched together, restless. Minutes dragged. I thought about all the people who'd passed Norbert on that street, the cold in Snowy's tiny body, the way they'd leaned into each other the second they were reunited. Losing that now would undo everything they'd fought through to survive. The sound of footsteps snapped my attention back. The director was holding a thin folder, her face still neutral. "If you're sure you can take both," she said, "and you understand the medical follow-ups they'll need, they're yours." I felt Kitty's hand grab mine hard. The breath I'd been holding broke out in a shaky laugh. "We're sure." The staff led us to the kennels, and the moment those gates swung open, two blurs of white fur barreled toward us. Norbert charging ahead, Snowy a half step behind, his tail finally wagging with real energy. They hit my legs like a wave, paws scrambling, eyes bright. I knelt down, letting them climb into my arms. Snowy's head tucking under my chin, while Norbert pressed against my chest like he was afraid to let go. "We're going home," I whispered. And for the first time since that frozen street, both puppies were warm. The drive home felt like a scene I didn't want to end. Kitty sat in the back seat with both puppies curled against her. Norbert stretched protectively along Snowy's side. The heater filled the truck with soft warmth, but it was the steady rhythm of their breathing that made everything feel right. When we pulled into the driveway, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the snow-covered yard. Norbert bounded out first, nose to the ground, tail high, circling the space like he was mapping every inch. Snowy followed more slowly, his paws pressing tiny prints into the fresh snow, his eyes wide with curiosity. Inside, the fire in the living room was already crackling. Kitty spread a thick blanket near the hearth, and the puppies settled without hesitation, Norbert curling into a half-moon around Snowy, who rested his head on Norbert's front paws. I sank into the armchair across from them, watching the flames dance over their fur. "I thought I was saving them," I said quietly, my voice almost lost under the pop of the firewood. "Turns out, saving me." Kitty smiled from the sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "That's how it works, isn't it?" Norbert's eyes drifted closed first, his breathing deep and slow. Snowy shifted once, pressing closer and let out a soft sigh that seemed to empty the last of the cold from his bones. In that quiet, with the snow falling outside and their warmth filling the room, it felt like the world had finally righted itself. For the first time in days, there was no rush, no fear, only the simple, unshakable truth that they were home and they were safe. Some stories stay with you because they change how you see the world. Watching Norbert, a German Shepherd puppy, guard that storm drain for days just to keep a husky puppy alive, I realized something we should never forget. Dogs never betray. They love without conditions. They protect without question. And they stay even when the rest of the world walks away. This wasn't just a dog rescue. It was a lesson in loyalty, in the kind of courage that comes in small kite, shivering bodies with hearts too big for their size. Norbert didn't care about the cold, the hunger, or the danger. He only cared that Snowy made it out alive. And Snowy, in turn, trusted him with everything. If you ever wonder whether compassion matters, remember this. Most people walk past that drain, but one call, one act, one choice to stop that saved two lives. And maybe by sharing this, you'll help save more. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. Every share, every comment, every person who sees Norbert and Snowy's story helps spread the truth about what it means to stand by someone, whether they walk on two legs or four. Dogs like Norbert and Snowy are why Brave Paws exists. They remind us that we can be better. We can be the ones who don't turn away. Don't forget to subscribe.